Hello, I'm doing a review for this book, Hold On To Your Kids by Neufeld and Gabor. This book appealed to me. There's something about Mate. I listen to him and I think, yeah, he knows it. And then I listen to a bit more and I think, no mate, you've gone too fucking far now. I bought this book when I was in the he knows it phase, so let's see how we progress. The idea of this book seems to boil down to it's all their friends' fault. And I'm not wholly against such a theory. My kids are homeschooled and socialisation is an issue which is easily thrown around, and I feel the pressure. It was only once my children had finally made friends that I realised that I wasn't actually that keen on the idea. These new potent influences in my children's lives were not entirely appreciated. Lovely children as they were, my submissive little lovelies are just too easily led. And if they're going to follow someone's tune so blindly, then it's going to be my bloody tune. Friends have been just another reminder from my culture that whatever I'm told I should be doing is probably the opposite of what will bring me happiness. When will I stop trusting my culture? When my children have become deeply attached to a friend, I have been uncomfortable with it. I see that my child places their trust, hopes and dreams on someone who is not able to appreciate them. They are a child themselves. Because of homeschooling, I have the power to be fully aware of this situation and to step in if I feel it's necessary. All that being said, I do not feel that we have a right to our children, as this book seems to imply. We need to work at being there for our children if we want them to trust and love us. And the peer orientation idea, that is being attached to friends instead of parents or other suitable adults, of this book just proves this point. That if we do not build a solid relationship with our children, they will fill the void with whatever else they can. In simplistic terms, this book is telling me what I already know, that the most important things for my family's happiness and success is good relationships between us. And it's always good to be reminded of that, as it's never a done job. It's something that must constantly be worked at as the members evolve. In more complex terms, this book just pissed me off. When it demonised peers, patronised children and never blamed the parents. This book just blames the problems on friends too much. I found this book really frustrating. It will articulately point out a problem in the parent-child dynamic and then go and throw in some bullshit cause to the problem, which always blames the child or their friends and assumes that the parent is doing a perfect job. I don't completely disagree with this theory that children being so heavily absorbed in their peer culture rather than their family is damaging. But I think that laying every social ill of the 20th century at its feet is a little heavy. This book seems to lay the blame for peer orientation at anything other than the parents. Comments such as children being seduced away from parental attachments made me furious. Children are not seduced away from their parents, they are dropped by their parents, whether the parents realise that's what they are doing or not, and they are mopped up by anything else that they can form an attachment with, from comfort blankets, dummies, TV, computer games, to shit food or the constant need for the next new thing. And a look at the adults around you will show you that we're just the same. Saying that children are seduced away from their parents insinuates that the children doing the seducing are well aware of their bad intentions and the damage they will cause, which of course is almost always not the case at all. It became apparent pretty early on that the problem with children nowadays, to these authors, is that they are not good. According to the writers, when children are attached to their parents, it will mean that they naturally want to please them and therefore will be good, for fear of otherwise falling out of their favour. Oh, ain't that cute? But now children have somehow become attached to their peers. Instead, no word yet on how this has happened, but I'm pretty certain they're not going to blame the parents. They haven't blamed them for anything yet. This misattachment has brought the whole world down and created rudeness, disobedience, pop culture, bad hairstyles, tattoos, throwaway fashion, no respect or tolerance, and it will undoubtedly lead to total chaos. This book keeps on referring to the point that if a child is well attached to their parents, then they will be good. Oof. That is a term I hate, being attached to anyone, young or grown. This book asserts that children will actively be bad when they are peer-oriented because their attachment is not to their parents. I can't be the only person who has read this idea in this book and thought what utter bollocks it is. The authors blame peer orientation for every fault with children today, from idleness and rudeness to the over-sexualised culture. Apparently, the teen culture explosion stems from the children, not the culture that they live in, and the businesses which make millions from their distorted views are merely responding to what is already there. Bullshit. I actually agree with the writer's description of modern children's behavioural problems, but whereas the authors blame these problems on the children being peer-oriented, I don't agree. I agree that children are overly attached to their friends, but I believe that this is just another symptom to go on the list of problems that children are currently dealing with. The real problems with children nowadays are varied. Unlike the authors of this book, I am not going to say that it is all down to one thing. But I do think that a major cause of these problems is the detachment of adults from children, and that is a different thing. Whilst this book is exhaustive about the damage being done to our children and the quicksand of culture that parents and children become sucked into, it does little to explain how this situation can be improved on any scale. Parents are reprimanded for using the parenting tools that society pressures them to use and shamed for being swallowed by their own issues when their children need them. But what help is really on offer to us? Most of us are already severely damaged by the culture that we live in, that this book describes, and it does at least recognise this. So how do we escape from this labyrinth? It feels like for every good move we bend ourselves backwards to secure, we blindly fall forwards 2 wrong moves. I began to wonder if the problem was that the book was written by 2 men. I don't want to be sexist, but they kept making these stupid comments along the lines of, obviously parents shouldn't allow themselves to get annoyed or raise their voices to their children or ever use physical or psychological force, brackets shaming, or leverage, brackets bribes, to coerce their child's behaviour. And I just began to think, you clearly don't spend a lot of time with your children. The authors also keep harking back to the good old days. This is bizarre to me. In times gone past, children have been terrorised by adults. Children have been good, which the authors seem obsessed with, because they were in fear of adults. Teachers and parents wielded such control because they could physically attack children who stepped out of line. But on the other hand, children were more involved in the adult world, helping around the home, working, befriending children of wider ages, and having a wider family to be a part of. All things which bridge the journey into adulthood. I also want to make a note that women working is not a new phenomenon. Check your history books, if you can find any about normal women, that is. The new phenomenon is schooling, with children being segregated by age. So, what about the schooling system for damaging our children's attachment to adults? The authors date the phenomena of peer attachment back to the post-war era. Does this tally with extending school hours and removing children from the adult worlds of work? The problem has got worse as time has gone on. As the years go by, the time children are confined to the artificial atmosphere of school and excluded from the real world has increased. The issue of school can't be ignored. This book recognises how much more difficult it is for parents to be the compass point of their children's lives when they spend so much time apart. It is then reliant on the child having a healthy attachment to their teacher. With 29 other pupils' attention to compete against, and overstretched teachers who are bound down by restrictive curriculums, it's not surprising that most school children do not look to their teachers for their guidance in learning about the world. Children now go to school when they are younger than ever before, and stay there until they are older than ever before, maintaining this infantilized artificial version of the world, where very little, if any, responsibility is given to them. Organised by age as the main criteria, with very little opportunity for inter-age leader and fellowship. With extended school hours through breakfast clubs, after-school clubs and holiday clubs. Is it any wonder our children look to their friends to satisfy their attachment needs? But unlike this book, I do not think that our children just happen to choose this path. Adults have implemented it. Misunderstanding the consequences maybe, but it is the parents' fault nonetheless. They must own it. Which brings us on to parenting. What about parenting techniques? Breastfeeding, natural birth, bonding, not sending children off into someone else's care as quickly as possible, not forcing women to be confined to the home because she has children with her. These are all issues of attachment. How can we correlate detachment parenting, extending school, and excluding children from the adult world with the unarguable situation described in this book? What came first, the rejection of children or their peer orientation? What I suggest is that peer orientation is a symptom of a culture that has neglected its children. Reasons given in this book for the attachment void were wholly flawed. The authors suppose that all parents are doing what is needed, apart from the occasional slip, and that other peer attachments are lurking around every corner waiting to snare our children. In reality, children are hardwired to follow their parents, and they are often actively pushed away from us. We prioritise other things over them. Work, keeping the home tidy, cooking, our personal interests, TV and internet. We do not give them what they need. That is why their attachment goes to others. I am not trying to attack parents. I believe the root cause of our lack of attachment to our children is social, in the form of pressuring us to prioritise anything other than time with our children, to leaving us unsupported in our role with unrealistic expectations of the services we should be able to provide. Well-behaved children, clean tidy house, home-cooked meals, active member of the workforce, follower of fashion, and much, much more. We feel genuine guilt when we do not meet any of these requirements, because genuine, unrealistic expectations are being forced onto us. It's impossible for us to succeed. And what about business? Peer orientation could be described as a marketing success. We live in a culture that is actively working against what would bring us peace and happiness, that is actively digging out and exploiting our weaknesses. This isn't a parenting issue, it's a world issue. The giant clusterfuck that is known as modern child rearing is merely another symptom. The damaging peer orientation is not the cause or even the problem. It is just another symptom. And it is a problem that is vast and overwhelming and growing. Perhaps there are a few parents who can manage to work around it, but most of us are just trying to survive, with very little chance of being able to thrive. And we can be left feeling so helpless. We see the damage, we recognise it, but any of our efforts feel like too little too late, like tipping out a bucket of water over the side of the Titanic. Now we move on to the second part of the book, and it's all change, mostly. Well, this book is a tale of two halves. First half, hated it. Second half, seemed to be loving it. The authors talk about the difference between adult-child attachments and child-to-child attachments, and why the adult-child attachment is so important for children's development into adults, and how child-to-child attachments hold this development back. This was illustrated well and convincingly. There was a heavy emphasis on the value of attachment, which I agree with. It talks about, when dealing with our children, concentrating on the relationship first, the behaviour later. As the more strained the relationship is, the less likely our children are to heed our advice. This seems logical and something that deep down we know. We just need to actually implement. So this was a good reminder for me, and it highlighted just how often I get things wrong. If I'm honest, I know this already. I appreciate this push in the right direction, and in practice, doing this, it has been helping. Although I have to question how long I will keep it up now that I'm no longer reading the book. I found this section very informative about peer pressure and bullying, but not necessarily appreciating the entire situation. I think this book would be useful for people who want to build or repair relationships with their children. I also think it would be useful for people who have understood the concept and benefits of attachment parenting with a younger child, but would like more help to keep their attachment with an older child. I think I can put myself in that bracket. Personally, I fell into attachment parenting because it seemed to make the most sense in practice. My instincts and the baby's cues drove us in that direction. But as my children have become influenced by the modern world, TV, friends and culture, I have definitely struggled. I have struggled between giving them what they say they want and what I think is best for them. I have struggled between giving them freedom and protecting them from negative influencing forces. These are common parenting conflicts, especially as we deal with new areas that didn't exist when we were children or didn't exist in their current contexts. And I think this book can help me. I've gone from hating this book, but really agreeing with certain aspects of it, to, well, still hating it because I can't change my mind that much that quickly, but wholeheartedly agreeing with pretty much all of the second section. So I definitely have an issue with the order of this book. If it's true that the male mind is more problem solving, then I can see why these two male authors have identified the problem in the first part of the book and then in the second part gone on to solve it. I understand why the authors want to explain the problem before giving the solution. But this has left the first part complaining so heavily about children and being so blaming and patronising that I found it almost impossible to get through. I wanted to stop reading it many times. My intention to give it a bad review was the only thing driving me on at times. That is not good reading. I really think this book would be much better if a way could be found to blend the two sections. In the second part of the book, I was impressed by the authors. The book was very detailed about many painful areas of childhood, such as friendship dynamics, bullying, early sexual encounters, etc., with the demonstration that these are immature people who need adult guidance. There is even the odd omission of responsibility for the situation, such as page 188, our refusal to invite them to depend on us drives them into the arms of each other. When speaking about his own experiences with his children, Neufeld took responsibility for the breakdown in their attachment and offered inspiring examples of how to rebuild it. The harmful effects of the loss of village parenting for our children is covered well in this book, and it cannot be underestimated. Whether it's trusted friends of the family or better still the extended family, children benefit massively from having as many loving attached adults around them as possible, as do adults. And for most modern people, this is missing. When parenting falls so entirely to the parents who are more often than not in full-time work, how can we be surprised that the pressure is too much to take, that it just doesn't work? It's basic maths. This book also points out how many parents and grandparents are also more attached to their peers and their screens than they are to their families. I think this needs to be expanded. This is the chicken that birthed the egg. This book convincingly fights against socially accepted norms about how children need friends and about the way these relationships are prioritised. This book argues that what children need are their parents and other caring, guiding adults, and I certainly agree with this. As much as I agreed with the sentiments of the second part of the book, I also felt it could be very idealistic, and I was left wondering how most parents can realistically nurture strong attachments with their children in the context of modern culture, work, school, tech. For example, the authors suggest that parents recreate an attachment village to replace what has been lost from extended family and communities. It's a nice idea in principle, but I feel it's pretty unrealistic in the current cultural climate. Similarly, with the suggestions of having the people who will be caring for our children over for dinner and invited into our everyday lives, I just don't think these suggestions are based in reality. Many of us have tried to build more personal relationships, but have found that day nurseries or schools don't want input from the parents. They usually want to be left to get on with their routines, which tick enough boxes, and they would appreciate it if the parents just did as they were told. I found the new section in this updated edition of the book on the advance of the internet and screens interesting from an attachment point of view. Their description was that an attachment void is quickly filled but never satisfied by the feelings of connection and interaction that we get from social networking and gaming. Most of us can look at ourselves to see that this is true, and from that position we can evaluate how much more addicted children and young adults quickly become as they are designed by nature to be followers. Page 284 quotes, "Few adults can handle their affair with the internet. Why do we expect our children to be able to do so?" This is something I have spouted many times myself. To sum up, the first thing I didn't like about this book was that the print was too small to comfortably read. This was constantly aggravating. The book was also just too long. 300 pages of microscopic print to get an issue across is too much, even if it is an important issue. Points were reiterated repeatedly. Why cite one example when you can cite 10? I think that for me this book was the wrong way round. Too much complaining about the problem, and not entirely accurate complaining, just put me into a negative mood. The second part of solving the problem had some excellent parenting information that would be helpful to anyone, but I was so put off the book by that point that the goodness was bittersweet. The points raised by the authors were accurate, valid and exhaustive, but they were also incomplete. The book raises the issues of our children's unhappiness that they may or may not even realise they are suffering from. It very accurately explains what is wrong with our children. I couldn't disagree with it, but it refused to blame the parents. And I think it is important that we take the responsibility for screwing up our kids. Only when we accept it can we then blame the reasons why we screwed up so much on the structure of our society that we live in. And when we do that, I think we'll be able to find more constructive solutions that can be implemented on a larger scale. This book goes on and on about how being peer-oriented is the problem, and it demonstrates very well why it is a problem. But in my opinion, it's not the problem, but it is in fact just another symptom of a bigger problem, which is the detachment parenting, which, despite the suggestions of the authors, is not a modern phenomenon, but which has undoubtedly spiralled in new directions in the surreal dimensions of our ultra-technological, crowded yet separated lives. Instead of the term peer-oriented, I am much more inclined to use detached. Our children should be attached to a primary caregiver, but because our society has deprived them of this, they are now detached, which leaves them falling free and looking for any impersonation of attachment they can find, whether it is a dummy, a toy, the TV, internet, food or peers. We see it in adults as anxiety, depression, addiction. It's all the same attachment void. The underlying message of this book is that our children need us, and it's damaging them to be left to be guided by their peers into adulthood. Even if that is what our society is telling us to do, it is not benefiting any of us. This is something that I have come to realise for myself from my own experience with my children. I was desperate for them to make friends, but almost as soon as they did, I felt the competition. The choices I make for my children are not always easy ones, but they are based on what I feel to be the best thing for them. Friends brought peer pressure to follow the social norms, which I had rejected for what I felt were good reasons. It has been difficult, but even before reading this book, I had decided that I needed to take back the control. Not because there was anything wrong with my children's friends, but because my child's upbringing is not their decision to make. It's my responsibility. And although it can be difficult, sometimes very difficult, to stand by our principles, no one has our child's best interests at heart more than we do. If people want to have a better understanding of the importance of strong interdependent attachments in relation to children, and in fact all of us, and the effect of upbringing through individual parenting and society's influence, then I would strongly recommend The Continuum Concept by Jean Liedloff. It's better written, more to the point, more inspiring, and a much better read all round. I would also like to recommend John Holt's books for his excellent observations of how children learn about the world and mature, and why it's so important for them to be involved in the world of adults. Okay? Thank you. That was a long one. Thank you.